So turkeys with the Schwacker. I actually used the Levi Morgan series, the blue Schwacker. It was a 125 grain, 2.5 inch cut, I believe. Some of y'all can correct me if I'm wrong on that. And I Texas heart shot that bird at 10 yards, and it broke through the tailbone of the bird and got into the vitals and killed the bird. The broadheads, like I said, did bend. They didn't break. They did bend, but they didn't break. So I was still going in there with 2 blades, cutting that bird up. The bird flew, my fault. He was going to die at like 5 feet from the blind, but he got up. I was trying to get out of the blind and get to him, busted him up. He flew in the air and died in midair at like 80 yards in midair, and I found the bird. But he it done some damage on him. It looked like he took a hatchet and just hit him in the tailbone with a hatchet. So I like the wider cuts, the 150s and the 125s. I like them for turkeys because they get you a real good wide cut with Schwacker on turkeys, and the blades are thick enough that they will bend, but they won't break. Another one that I have got is the Slick Trick Raptor Trick. Now, on this broadhead, it opens and deploys just like the Schwacker. Whenever I shoot this broadhead though, it tends to fly lower impact than the Schwackers. And what I think that has to do is if you look at this head here, we open this up, that's a big head on the front of that, which is good for hitting bone. But that is a very big head on that, and I believe with that bigger head, it just causes it, and it's got the grooves go all like at a 20-degree angle, 30-degree angle like that. So I think it pitches it down a little bit more. That's just me, that's experiences that I've had with it. But you might have different experiences with it. Now with this broadhead, I shot the doe at 60 yards out of the back door, and it flew like a dart, and I got good penetration at 60 yards. The doe went 40 yards and piled up. Same thing, you're going to get a small cut going in, and then it's going to open past, after it enters, it's going to open up past the skin, and you got fresh blades going in. You're not going to get that big of an entry cut. Get a pass through, or internally in the deer, you're going to get a bigger cut. So blood trailing it, if you don't get a pass through like the Schwacker, is going to be a little bit harder. At least it was for me. This did bend on a whitetail. This was the broadhead I shot the doe with. And they bent. They did not break, but they did bend. And I hit her right behind the shoulder and hit a rib. So it impacted ribs and it bent. The blades are not as thick as a Schwacker. But the broadhead did hold up. The blades did not break. The ferrule did not take any damage. And it flew good and it tuned good once you got it tuned. Little bit of tuning with this one, but the blades did hold up. They didn't break. But with these two broadheads, they open the same. They do the same job. If I had to go through and pick one between these two, I would pick the Schwacker over this one. With the Slick Trick Raptor Tricks, they give you a practice head. You cannot use the heads that you're hunting with as a practice head. Ain't a big deal, but if I'm spending the money, I'd rather have 3 practice heads in a bag versus 1 practice head in a bag. So that's just a little bit difference. Schwacker opens with a rubber band or with a band system. This opens with a band system. They do the same exact thing. For me personally, I favor the Schwacker a little bit more because it doesn't bend on deer. Now we get in to the fixed blade category. And I'm a little bit biased. Now this is a Slick Trick SS3. This is a double bevel 3-blade broadhead. It is fully milled out it's not a 2-piece or anything like that. These blades are fully milled out. The broadhead is a solid 1-piece broadhead. I have shot these broadheads and tuned them. And the only thing with these is they're a very, very small cut. I think they're like a 1 3/8 cut, 1 1/8 cut, somewhere around in between there. When I got out, they done great at shorting it, like 20 to 40 yards. Awesome. If I got back to 100 yards, these did not fly that well consistently with arrows. Some would fly good, some wouldn't fly good. Very noisy broadhead. These are a noisy broadhead. I don't like the small cut on these, but I did not shoot an animal with these broadheads, but my brother did. Same exact broadhead. He shot a doe, and he hit her a little bit high. Got great penetration. She was quartered away, and he was in a tree stand, so he had to shoot her high. It busted. He shot her right on the opposite side of the spine, so it busted through one edge of her spine and then went into the lungs. The deer went 30 yards and died. So with that being said, even though this is a small cut, if you put it where you're supposed to, the deer's gonna die. If you hit bone, it's not gonna hurt that broadhead. When we grabbed his broadhead, there was a little bit of rolling on the blades, but other than that, it was nothing that you couldn't sharpen out. These blades, you can put on a honing stone and resharpen them. So for me personally, if you're shooting a deer from 20 to 40 yards and you want to bust through bone, and you want to be able to reuse your broadhead, resharpen your broadhead, I would go with the SS3. Now we get into some broadheads that I don't happen to have on me at the moment. So the G5 Mega Meats and Dead Meats, specifically the Mega Meats. I used the Mega Meats this season, this past spring, on turkeys. Recommend it 10 out of 10 for a turkey broadhead. It did bend the blades on turkeys, but that was the first time I've ever shot a turkey with a bow and had the bird die and have a blood trail. Anybody that bow hunts turkeys knows that it's hard. A bird does not bleed a lot. I mean, they'll bleed, but they don't bleed a lot, not like a deer. That was the first time I had a blood trail for a turkey, and it was just spatters of blood all the way up to where the bird was. I watched a bird die 30 yards up the hill, 40 yards up the hill, and he just couldn't take it. I mean, everything, it hit every organ. I believe it's a 3-inch cut. It's, correct me if I'm wrong on that, it just absolutely demolished that bird. And he ended up going, like I said, 30, 40 yards and just piled up. My brother shot chubs just the other day, Christmas Eve. My brother shot the buck that we called Chubs. He shot that deer at the point of the scapula, and it shattered every blade but one on that broadhead. The blade entered the deer, one blade cut the deer's heart. We had to put another arrow in him. We were able to put another arrow in him. But he shot that deer with that broadhead, and every blade but one, 2 blades shattered on impact. Now he hit it in a very hard part of the scapula, but mostly, for the most part, a deer scapula, I can take a screwdriver and hold a scapula, especially when it's wet, got fluid around it like when in a deer, and I can sit there and punch a hole in it with a screwdriver. So shooting through a deer's shoulder, its main portion of the scapula, is not that bad. What hurts on penetration with that, and this is another video time, but what hurts on penetration on that is when it's got the fluid, it's flexible. It absorbs shock. We'll put it that way. It absorbs shock. So that first initial impact of your arrow, when it hits that scapula, the scapula absorbs shock and slows the arrow down. And that's why it's hard to get through penetration through a scapula, and that's why most people shoot a fixed blade. But that G5 Mega Meat shattered, straight impact into it, shattered 2 of the blades. So if he would have had a fixed blade, or if he would have had a broadhead that had shorter blades that were a little bit thicker, he probably wouldn't have had that problem. But like I said, I used it on turkeys, and other people use them and they work fine. That's the experience that I had with the Mega Meats. But 10 out of 10, Would recommend them for turkeys, especially shooting them and tuning them. They flew awesome. You're going to get one practice head with the G5 Mega Meat. Now you can buy other practice heads, just like some of these other broadheads, but they tuned great. They flew great. They're a little bit louder of a broadhead, not too bad, but 10 out of 10 would recommend the Mega Meats for a turkey. They're on a collar system. They're not on a rubber band or anything like that. They got a plastic collar. The blades pop in and hook into that. Whenever it impacts, it opens up. You're going to get a big hole, a giant hole with a Mega Meat on impact, and you're going to be able to track blood, trust me. Think about if I was going to shoot a mechanical G5, I would shoot the dead meat versus a Mega Meat, because the Mega Meat's blades are so long and thin that they're brittle. The dead meats are shorter and not as big of a cut, but they're not as brittle. But you're still getting a huge cut with a 3-blade broadhead with a dead meat. Now, America's favorite broadhead was a Rage hypodermic. And I did shoot a deer with a Rage hypodermic. I shot a doe, shot her at 18 yards. When I shot her, I hit her right behind the scapula where the meat, if you ever got a deer's front shoulder and cut the meat off where the scapula kind of dips like that at the back of it, I hit her right there. At 18 yards, the arrow had a complete pass through, went in there, come out the other shoulder, dead center of the other scapula. Now, it wasn't a big doe. She was probably about 75 pounds, so keep that in mind. But blew absolutely through her. The blades did bend. They didn't break. They did bend. I still didn't get a lot of blood with that broadhead. She only went 50. She probably went 35 and died, to be honest. It was over a hill, so she probably went about 35, 40, and she died. The deer died within probably 5 seconds, 3 seconds. I mean, it was a quick, she was bam, quick, dead. She was double lunged. The broadhead flew good. The broadhead tuned good. The Rage hypodermic was a little bit louder than some mechanical broadheads, I should say. The ferrule held up awesome. I mean, the ferrule held up great. It didn't have any bend or any roll in the ferrule, but the blades did bend. You can still go out there and shoot farther ranges with it. There's people that hunt with them all the time, shoot long distance. You're going to get a open cut. I had I believe the hypodermic's 2-inch. So you're going to get a cut on contact. So she had a slit in her about like that whenever I shot her. And I got an entrance and an exit. Everything was great. I knew where she fell. I looked for blood. And once I found her, I found blood, but it wasn't like anything you was expecting. It wasn't like big globs of where her lungs were just bursting it out of her. It was just blood about the size of a $50 throughout the trail. Of course, she was running fast. I don't think she had enough time to bleed before she expired, to be completely honest. But those broadheads, they did work good. Some other Rage broadheads, I had a buddy that shot a deer this season with a crossbow in a Rage Extreme. And it was an aluminum ferrule. He literally shot the deer in the shoulder, and the aluminum ferrule split and peeled, was laid back like a banana like that. The blades were all bent and mangled and everything. And I really think that everybody that this is a mechanical broadhead gets one with a weak ferrule design, weak ferrule material. And you can have a aluminum ferrule for a mechanical broadhead as long as that ferrule is designed and there's something in the front of it to take that impact in versus another bleeder blade in the front that's really thin. But it demolished that broadhead, and I think he's actually going to end up switching after that. The deer died. The deer went 30 yards and died, but he probably would have blew through the deer if that first shock of shooting that deer didn't bend the blades and everything up. So they work good. It does have its pros and its cons with those broadheads. You're going to have a practice head in there with those broadheads. I'm pretty sure you cannot, which I didn't, you cannot shoot each broadhead you're going to take to the woods as a practice head. You're going to have a practice head in the pack. So those are kind of pros and cons. Cost of the broadhead, you're getting 3 broadheads to hunt with and 1 practice head. So if I'm spending 50, 60 bucks on a pack of broadheads, I want something that I can actually practice with every single one of them and see how they fly for each arrows versus just being able to shoot one arrow and being like, okay, well, my other ones are good. That's me. I'm really OCD about my setup. But on the last one was the Sever broadheads. I shot splits 165 with a Sever broadhead this year, and I shot the buck from Indiana with a Sever broadhead. And I used a titanium 2.0. They have different configurations. I believe they got a steel and a titanium is what they make theirs out of. I don't think they have an aluminum. But I used the titanium 2.0. It's 2-inch cut, 125 grain. And the whole ferrule is made out of titanium, and they have really thick blades. They are a cut on contact, so their blades open, and when they open, it kind of kicks the blades back, and they deploy like this. So it opens and they deploy like that, kind of like the Rages. But the blades lock in and they pivot. They're on a pivot system, so your blades lock and then pivot like that around bone. That is one of the only broadheads that I've ever shot a deer at distance and had a pass through. Not pass all the way through because splits was at 40 yards. I was shooting 409 grain arrow, and I shot him through both ribs, sets of ribs. I had an entrance and an exit. Splits went 45 yards and died, and blood was bursting out at, head height through the tall fortress we planted. We were sitting there just scanning lights, and there was blood everywhere. The broadhead suffered no bending, none. The broadhead was perfect except for the fact of where the 2 little wings engaged to engage the blade. There was just a roll perfectly at the tips of where the little wing blades end up on the broadhead blade themselves. There was a little bit of a roll. Other than that, the rest of them, just a tiny enough to stick your fingernail in roll. And the ferrule and everything else was fine. The broadhead was perfectly fine, still sharp, and it took no damage whatsoever. Now on my deer in Indiana, the same broadhead that I shot splits with, I shot that whitetail in the center of the scapula at 27 yards. I got 8 inches of penetration with a same arrow setup, 409 grain. Got 8 inches of penetration after blowing through his shoulder. The deer did run farther. He went like 150 and died. And since I shot him in the scapula and the arrow was still in him, he didn't bleed a lot until the arrow broke. When he broke the arrow, oh my God, there was blood everywhere. When you know you got a good broadhead whenever you can just walk and be like, oh, yep, just walk a straight trail to a deer, and you don't have to sit there, bend over and look and try to find it. But when you can walk a straight trail and find that deer with a broadhead, you got a good one. Every Sever broadhead runs off of a rubber band system. You could take the rubber band out, and there's a set screw, just like the Schwackers, Levi Morgan series, and the LRPs, that you can put in, lock the blades, and use every single blade for a practice head. You can only buy them. You can't buy them at a realtor. You can only buy them at sever.com. They're $15.99 for a titanium head. If you get I think it's like $54 for a pack of 4, if I'm correct. I think it's like $47 for a pack of 3. But every broadhead you buy is also a practice head, and they are a quiet broadhead, and it and the Schwacker are probably my 2 favorite heads, because as far as tuning, when we're talking about tuning a broadhead and you're only adding, if you have to add anything, 1 or 2 clicks to your rest to get it to fly straight from 20 yards to 120 yards, then that's saying something. Um, as far as holding up between it and all the other broadheads, it held up just as good, if not even better, than the fixed blade broadheads. The blades, even the deer that I shot in Indiana, blowing through his scapula, the blade was not bent. The ferrules was not bent, but it had the same two little rolls where the wing blades, just like splits, where the wing blades open, just big enough to pop your fingernail in, and that was it. The blades were still sharp. The ferrule held up. Hoped it did. It was made of titanium. But there was no damage to the broadhead whatsoever. I actually took that broadhead and just closed it up and stuck the set screw in it and still used it for my practice head. There's the experiences with broadheads that I've had. I hope this helps you out. That's the review that I've done and kind of went through with everything that I've used these broadheads the past 3 years, 4 years or so. So I hope this helped you guys out on your broadhead choice for turkeys and whitetails for this next 2024 season. See you guys on the next one.